questions, and you can come back and put your video on and unmute yourself at that point if you choose. I also welcome you to add questions or comments to the chat during the course of the panel. My name is Molly Newgard, and I'm the Executive Director of Blue Sky Gallery. And Blue Sky, just a little bit about Blue Sky, we started as a small bare bones nonprofit showing regional photography, growing 45 years later now into a leading photo gallery space that exhibits the work of emerging and established photographers from around the country and even from around the globe. We offer 1 to 2 month exhibitions showing up to 24 artists in solo shows each year, and sometimes also offering group shows. As well, we show the work of more than 50 regional photographers from the Pacific Northwest in a program called our Viewing Drawers. It is a program that lasts all year long, and we're about to launch that program April 1st. So I invite all of you to visit our website to see the work of the Northwest artists online. This is now, I think, our 3rd year of partnership with En Foco, which has been a great collaboration. And each year we offer solo exhibitions to 2 En Foco fellows. And currently the work of Jon Henry graces our walls. Jon Henry, who is on the panel today. So we have about 24 more hours that the work is on the wall. And I invite you, if you're in Portland, to come down. I'll be working tomorrow. So come down, knock on the door. We are here. You have to see the work. I would say that one benefit of the COVID era has been finding more ways to bring programming to our audiences and to support our artists. And I think as we've all experienced, technology has helped us to do that. So here we are on Zoom with people from across the country and our panelists based in New York City. So thus we're excited to see how Jon's work can facilitate this larger discussion about art and activism and reform, and learn ways that art can help to make that difference. I'd like to thank Oscar Rivera of En Foco and Zemi Bar of Blue Sky for helping to organize this panel. And thank you, of course, to our panelists for their time and participation. And I turn it over to Oscar now, who will introduce our panelists. Thank you.
Forgot to take myself off mute. Howdy, folks. I'm Oscar J Rivera, and I am the development manager and curator at En Foco, which is a Bronx-based photography organization dedicated to highlighting and representing the efforts of artists of color. We do that through our fellowship programs, our photographic journal Nueva Luz, our exhibitions, and our archives programs. And we have a bunch of other support programs. And if you're interested in catching up with us, you can find us at enfoco.org. But before I introduce our panelists, I would like to take a moment to thank Blue Sky for their ongoing support of En Foco and all of our panelists. We at En Foco truly value this partnership. I would also like to thank our panelists today for joining us and having this really timely conversation. So today we have Jon Henry, one of En Foco's 2020 panelists, 2020 fellowship awardees, sorry. Adilka Pimentel, our lead organizer with Make the Road, and a facilitator is Alicia Grullon. She's an activist and an artist who's worked with El Museo del Barrio, the Bronx Museum of the Arts, and a bunch of others. Today, they're going to be discussing the intersections of art and activism, the lasting effects of broken windows policing, the constant threat of officer-involved violence in diverse communities, and a bunch of other things. And with that, I pass it over to Alicia.
Thank you, Oscar. Thank you very much. My name is Alicia Grullon, and I'm speaking to you from Untitled Chapter land, also known as the Bronx. And in light of the lives that were lost last week and the families left in grief, and for Black, Indigenous, and brown lives taken, and the mothers left behind without solace throughout this land, throughout the centuries, Adilka will start us off with a poem.
Thank you so much. Like Alicia said, my name is Adilka, I use she and they pronouns, and this is a piece I have. They lit flames in our gardens, ravished our homes, stacked our bodies on top of one another, threw us overboard, ripped our children from our arms and sold them for profit, and can't comprehend why we gather, why we fight, why we bawl, shout, holler. It's like having the human parts of you sacrificed, like having a church with no choir, a gospel sung through bullet hole homes nestled inside the damp walls that barely hold up. Where is our sanctuary? If not our churches, if not our schools, if not our homes, rage is watching the names of neighbors flash across TV screens because shots flooded their apartments, but not Brianna's. Outcries bring flash floods, a break of levees. Where is the Amber Alert for Black women, for Black girls, for Black trans women? Where are the Amber Alerts when police gun down our people? When someone's child isn't returning to their communal circle, to their mothers? Imagine being able to stop and replay a public lynching, an elephant stampede on George's neck while the world watched for almost 9 minutes. Minutes that dragged along like a body in the desert without water. There were cries that crawled their way out from a cave only to be met on the outside by leather and feet. Cries for mom, for water, for air, for life, for freedom, for change, for justice. We chant their names as mantra, as prayer, as a reminder. Ramarli, Eric, Akai, Sandra, Delron, Rakia, first name basis with ghosts. Fingers familiar with carving names across posters. Being Black in the US is constant bendiciones, so the ancestors protect the chest and the backs of our most vulnerable. It's loving a young man who reminds me of Elijah McCain. In his soft surrender, awkward tenderness in his young Black skin, his paintbrush replaced violins, and too often my heart races with that comparison. Where is home if not our stomping grounds? Where doñas know your every move from the window in apartment 3L, where papi at the bodega knows your sandwich order and why he's worked here for a decade, even though he's an engineer back home. It is watching the decay of streets that witness the D's throw your cousins up against the wall and violate their rights and their pockets. Is a place you can't afford to call home no more, to call yours no more, ours no more. The hood, like its people, hold multiple truths. Our bodegas are dead, our homes to murals and shelters for candlelit vigils, from pissy elevators to first-generation college students. It is an orchestra of sirens, music, and the songs of places we haven't visited in a long time. When there's conversation, the hood will make symphonies of the cries of the mother of Walter Wallace Jr. We shout their names, create libations from coroner reports, once birth certificates. Our bodies line up mountainside to hillside, arms looped in constant prayer, bellowing war cries that bounce back from riot shields and echo across skyscrapers toward a Black sky, the color of batons cracking ice cream cones that fit in the palms of strangers. What does it mean? For our roots to stay alive when they submerge us, for our lungs to expand after they've gassed us, for the people with lineage erased by the Atlantic to still feel connections to a home, to a people ripped from under their feet. It means the ground will continue to shake where we walk. It means we will hold one another during the fight of our lives for freedom. It means making phone calls to millions of voters, even though you can't vote, protecting polls from the same white supremacy that took your last name and gave you theirs. It is holding hands with your comrades and laughing so hard your body shakes. It is a reminder that joy is necessary when the light is dim. A reminder that we stand on the sturdy shoulders of giants. An anthology for further generations. It means that I believe that we will win. Thank you.
Stranger Fruit began in 2014, which is kind of crazy to even think about. While the work began in 2014, the project's concept really began in 2008. I had just come back from visiting family in Vienna, and the next day that I was going back to work was the morning of the Sean Bell verdict. Sean Bell was the young man who was murdered at his bachelor party in Jamaica, Queens. I'm born and raised in Queens, New York. I know Jamaica very well, as I spend hours upon weeks upon days in the neighborhood, going back and forth to family. So that story really stayed with me. It really hit me, really in my soul. It really stayed with me just for a number of reasons. One was the familiarity of events. Looking at the pictures in the paper of Sean and his friends, bloodied in the streets, it just felt like, these were clothes that I was wearing. This was around the same age. So that really hit home. I was too young to really understand what was going on with Rodney King. I knew something had happened, and I saw something important had happened, but I couldn't understand the magnitude of it. But with Sean Bell, I understood. About a year later, in 2008, 2009, one of my good friends was getting married, and at his bachelor party in the middle of New Jersey, while we're supposed to be, celebrating his upcoming wedding, all I could think of was Sean Bell. And what if this was happening to us? What if this was happening to him? And, thinking beyond, ourselves, thinking of the families, thinking of the family that's left behind, thinking of, Sean Bell never being able to see his daughter grow older, never even being able to marry his wife. Thinking of the families who are left behind, and then specifically thoughts of the mothers. That's kind of what led the work to the Pietà, thinking of that mother-son connection in art. The Pietà, of course, from Michelangelo, and thinks of, actually, this is the season in Lent, talking about the descent from the cross and Mary holding the dead body of Christ. It seemed very local and very similar, that this is something that these mothers have to think about and have to deal with. The mothers in the images that I've been making across the country for the past 7 years have not lost their sons, but they understand the reality that this is something that could happen to them. This is something that could happen to someone in their community. These, tragic acts of murder and hatred have happened in the most randomest of locations and occurrences that, you just can't help but feel for the families, and then think of what it means and what it does to the community afterwards. Just experiencing, thinking of, having that video, thinking of having that footage, which was one of the things that was important about Rodney King, was, seeing that footage and seeing it in the courtroom, but still getting the same results that we're getting today. Obviously that was one of the things that really stood with me. And now here we are, 2020, 2021, still going through these same things. Now, while I'm using, I'm focusing on the mother-son connection in the images, obviously it's larger than that, as we've just seen from just this time last year. Black trans lives matter. Black women matter. I'm using the mother-son connection in a very specific way to tell this story, but everyone is wrapped under this umbrella, dealing with police brutality, and no one is safe from it. Obviously, look at that last year, Tony McDade, Sean Reed, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. What else do you need to know that this is something that's very serious? We're keeping it brief as far as, talking about the project, but one thing that I wanted to mention was just thinking of the gaze and thinking of the mothers in the images and the intentional use of the gaze, of them looking directly into the viewer. And this is really as a connection point as a strategy to keep the viewer's attention, making it difficult for the viewers to look at the work and then walk away or disconnect yourself from it. This is something that's very real. This is something that is, affecting millions of Americans, and everyone has this fear. So don't look away from it, even though it may be easy for you, or it may not be something that you have to deal with. Millions of people do have to deal with this, and this is incredibly important. The project is set in 3 parts. They're the images of the mothers and sons recreating the Pietà. They're also the images, these portraits of the mothers in space, reflecting on the absence. Sometimes in the images, you can sense that there is another presence that's supposed to be there. Sometimes not so much. But there's also a connection to the mothers who have lost. What does, after the you know, the protesters have gone, after the media coverage is gone, after the trials have ended, you know, a day later, a week later, a month later, 5 years later, you know, what is normal supposed to be like after this has happened? Even when the trial comes, and, you know, as we're getting ready for the George Floyd trial, even if there's a conviction, that's still not justice. You're still left with someone who was murdered for absolutely nothing. And the final part of the project is the text elements from the mothers who are in the project. Again, they're not having to deal with this firsthand, thankfully, but they understand the emotional process that this is. And I'll share a couple of the text pieces with you. I feel hurt, anguish, and emotional turmoil. I recognize that this was only for a moment in time, but that's actually a depiction of life. Every second is a moment in time. That one moment can define the rest of your life. When I wake up and before I sleep at night, my son is the one person that's always on my mind. I want to know that he's safe. Another mother writes, it only increases my concern over the current state of affairs in this country regarding race and gender. No one is exempt from being victimized by perceived thoughts and ideas of others simply based on differences in color. And the last piece I'll share with you guys today. As I was gradually pulled into the scene and told about the pose, it began to make me think of the daily thoughts I have about my son. I have thoughts of love, change, determination, growth, and encouragement. I also have concerns regarding his health and safety as it relates to the growing conditions across this nation with African American males. There needs to be an immediate attention to stop the killing of Black males and suffering of mothers.
Thank you very much, Jon and Adilka, for sharing your work today. I think one of the aspects, Jon, of your series that has drawn me in is the highlighting of the humanity, and that is explicit through the gaze. And it's that humanity that's been denied to Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color because of white supremacy. So I wanted to start off with looking at how our humanity was stripped from BIPOC people, as briefly as I can, because that can be a whole panel series. But in light of our discussion, and it's interesting to note that the panel is being hosted in Oregon, where, you know, it occurred to me that due to the 1844 Black exclusion laws, it was illegal to be Black or even to enter if Black or of mixed race, specifically Black until 1924. And it's also it's also been the site of a large resistance to state-sanctioned violence and surveillance in the western part of the United States in 2020, as a result, among other things, because of George Floyd's murder. In his essay, The Endurance of Racial Disparity in the Criminal Justice System, from the anthology Policing the Black Man, Mark Maurer writes that from the moment white settlers reached this continent, color emerged as a defining feature that would shape the cultural, social, political, and economic development of the United States and the Western Hemisphere. And shape, and this is my addition, and shape who's considered human. I mean, as a result, race is experienced differently here, where the investment to possess or to be in the vicinity of whiteness determines the value of life, healthcare, housing, retirement, prosperity, and the odds of being killed by law enforcement. And all these are tied together to that ladder and to this enforcement and surveillance over our bodies. And just to be clear, Black people are not the problem or responsible for creating the structure of racism. and the politics and the economics that maintain its structure intact. The institution of slavery was about the production of goods for exchange, out of which white supremacy and racism emerged to make and continue maintaining the wealth it generated for the very few. In her book, An Indigenous People's History of the United States, Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz talks about the history of the Second Amendment and gun laws, and that they weren't about personal freedom, but rather in colonial times, they were a requirement for white male adults to enact violence and be a part of the violent repressive state, extending white supremacy and the manifest destiny. And it's in this tradition, and it's from this tradition that slave patrols were created, Jim Crow, lynchings, and Black codes emerged. So for me, like, to talk about the police is to keep this history in the foreground. And just recently, in 2017, The Intercept reported that police departments across the country have been infiltrated by white supremacist organizations. And then we have last week's shooting, right? That show that there doesn't seem to be an end. So the question that I have for us to start is, what do you think creates the lack of accountability or even acknowledgement, particularly by law enforcement and those who govern law enforcement on these issues? And what's being done about it? And we can do a popcorn, whoever, either one of you is ready to start.
I guess to jump in, it's just a refusal. They do not want to have those conversations, like, at all. And we keep coming back to, like I said, as you mentioned before, I keep coming back to the two words, acknowledgement and accountability. And it's not that there's a lack of it, it's just that there's refusal. They don't want to acknowledge that, like you said, that, we are human. They don't want to acknowledge that, what has been done was wrong, that nobody should have to go through this, that what they did was a crime. And the accountability is it just boggles my mind. We've all worked in professional settings. There has to be accountability in the workplace. Like, how would you not want accountability for your own job? You're doing something that's, obviously incredibly important, this civic duty, not a civic duty, but this civic role. Wouldn't you want just the finest people to work with you? And I figured you would have like a zero tolerance for people who were, abusing their power. But by this simple refusal of acknowledgement and accountability, that answers everything for me. If they wanted to do something about it, they would.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. Thank you for that question. I'm going to start off by saying that tonight I'm here as Adilka, the organizer, the person. My views are mine. I represent an organization, but I will say that my views are mine. I think there's a few layers to that question for sure. There has historically been a lack of accountability and a lack of transparency. And I'll talk in particular to the NYPD, painting a picture, 36,000 uniformed officers, including 5,500 school safety agents, which, those school safety agents technically in size make up the 6th largest police force in the country, right, patrolling our schools. And so they have a $6 billion budget. That's where the lack of transparency starts. I am part of the Defund NYPD campaign, and was last year. And to even know what their budget is made up of, it's not a lot of information that's out. So the transparency, the lack of transparency begins in budget and ends in, as we've seen, right, like disciplinary measures. The police is an institution that's kept alive by white supremacy. I consider myself an abolitionist in training and a student of abolition. I don't believe that there can ever be safety coming from police for many reasons, including the police are really around to protect property and profit of white folk, white wealthy folk. And if you're anything but that, you're gonna get, as we've seen, there is the term the police use called the blue wall of silence, where they will not they will not tell on each other, right? So if, let's take Eric Garner, for instance, right, who was put in an illegal chokehold by Daniel Pantaleo and had almost a dozen other officers around who didn't intervening, or saying something, or saying, you know, Daniel Pantaleo used too much force, is considered against like this code of honor that they have, this blue wall of silence, meaning that, and to me, that's why there is no such thing as a good cop, because even a cop who has good intentions won't step over that, you know. The police have incredibly powerful unions that back them and back the city. You know, the city's behind a lot of that. So when we're looking at why there is a lack of accountability and transparency, I would say historically, right, it's just the way it's been since they were created to capture enslaved folk who ran away. It's still, I say the faces are just different, but we live within the same, right, racist, violent, systemic thing that kills Black folk the minute they step out of their doors sometimes. And so every single time, whether it was Shambell, whether Akai Gurley here in the city, Eric Garner, every time a police officer is let go, I'm not surprised, but it doesn't kind of like soften that blow. I'm still in mourning, I'm still grieving, right? Like all the time when this happens, whether it's because I have relationships with some of the families or not, it's still like the police can kill a Black person anywhere and I grieve for it, you know? And so I feel like the only way to end this is to dismantle that system that exists, which isn't this panel, so I won't go super deep on that.
Well,
But
no, I mean, you can't make ice cream out of sour milk, right? You can't.
Yeah.
It has to be upturned. I'm happy you mentioned the blue wall of silence, because that's what we saw manifest in Minnesota this summer. And I think it in combination of the outrage of what everyone was watching and the pandemic, and unemployment just, you know, gushing out like a broken pipe, you know. I think that it was an incredible moment, because it was almost as if everyone was outside breathing at the same time, but also yet again having to deal with this trauma, because to your point, Adilka, it's a family, there's a family that has had a life violently taken away from them, and it's immediately impacting that family, but it also impacts the community and future generations. I mean, the trauma, what I'm seeing is this trauma, this generational trauma of mothers throughout the centuries losing their children due to violence, and how it's particularly impacting BIPOC communities, and particularly the Black community in this country. That there is no, I don't even want to use the word reckoning, but the care, the lack of care for communities is particularly impactful, and oftentimes it's through art that this care and this healing of generational trauma is even shows up. Do you think that we can address, because police reform, could you explain maybe to either one of you the differences between police reform and abolition? Because sometimes I think that like it's hard to address police reform without addressing mass incarceration, because the both of them go hand in hand.
Yeah, John, you want to give it a shot and then I go, since I spoke a lot last time?
Sure. Yeah, I wrote down the word reform again, as you just mentioned, Eric Garner's murder and the chokehold, which wasn't that illegal, which means that was reformed. Like that was an instance of police reform that ended up making this an illegal act. And here we are, we're still placed with a dead Black man, and you've seen how the trial has gone and everything. So I I don't know what reform can do. Honestly, I'm an artist. I'm not in, you know, these sects or have that knowledge, you know, where
Yeah.
we're really, you know, knowing what reform can do. But I mean, what's what's obvious, and yeah, you know, obviously that's what made last year so painful to exist through, was even, I mean, especially for those who are in New York, you know, before the footage of George Floyd came out, before we heard about Breonna Taylor, Sean Reed and Tony McDade, you know, we're all locked in our homes due to the pandemic. And you're seeing what police officers at the NYPD is doing in the Upper West Side or on the, you know, in Hudson River Park, giving masks out to people who are in the park, you know, not black folks, you know, in like Chelsea, like just giving out masks and shit. But then in Harlem, in the Bronx, there are videos of them beating the shit out of black and brown people. And you're like, even in a pandemic, even in something as serious as this, where we don't know what's going on, we don't know what the timeline is going to be, we're still having, like, you can't find another way to figure this out. It always comes down to violence, and of course that violence always gets escalated. Another word that I always come back to is discerning, and de-escalation. Officers, NYPD across the country have proven that they can de-escalate a situation when it is not a black person, when it's not a brown person. You know, the tragedy that just happened a few days ago, that person's still alive. They had a gun. You know that they murdered people.
Yeah.
How many times over and over and over again, the same thing happens. And now you look at these, you know, cases, Breonna Taylor is sleeping. Why is she murdered? Why is the only trial, you know, the only thing that they get the cop on is endangering the life of the bullet that he missed? You know what I'm saying? So you look at each case and you're just like, what? Like how? Like none of this makes sense. So to loop back, and I could, you know, I could harp on that for, I guess, like the next 16 hours. But I guess, you know, coming back to that idea of reform, I will plead ignorance. I don't know what form or shape reform can have, you know, other than, you know, really just, and I don't understand, again, well, I understand, but you know, how, you know, defunding is probably the way. Abolition might just have to be the way. I think the whole system needs to be broken down. The system works. It's just not designed to work for black and brown folks. So.
And last week, in the case of one of the women's husbands, they had gone together to get a massage, and they were in separate rooms. And one of the women's husband was from Central America, and he was handcuffed, and at gunpoint, handcuffed. He didn't even know his wife had been killed. For several hours, was it? For 50 minutes? I'm just bringing that up because it's again and again, it's this lack of recognizing humanity.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the lack of humanity. Yeah, when I think about like Tamir Rice being 12, and like you can't see there's no way you see this 12-year-old. There's no way. How? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's the same way police in the street see black boys and add a few years to their age when they go approach them, right? Like it's sometimes I get stuck on just not understanding. And I'm listening to both of y'all. It made me think about, you know, John, you mentioned the pandemic and all that. And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. I remember what you're talking about. And I remember last year, because in New York City, people were out every day. It didn't matter, right? Every day, marching, every day, the summer, the spring, it didn't matter. And there were some protesters who were barricaded by the police on both sides, and they started pepper spraying everyone. And so, you know, I been pepper sprayed from afar by the police, but you know, even from afar, the reactions you get where you can't breathe, you're coughing in a pandemic where the illness spreads right through your respiratory. It's just, I can't think of another word besides evil. Like, for you to do something like that to these people, knowing what it's going to cause, knowing everything that's happening, you know, it's just, there's no way they will see the humanity of someone and do that, you know?
Mhm.
And so the quickest way I can think of, because I know we're running a bit low on time, and I know we're going to get a Q&A soon too, it's like, reform to me is kind of like putting out these fires, right? You're patching up these little things. And in police, like, talking in real life, police reform can look like, or has looked like, whether in New York or in other cities, you know, what you were mentioning, you know, banning things like the chokehold, which was banned in 93 or 94, because the police killed Anthony Baez, who was playing football, I think in the Bronx, and his football hit their police car and he got out and killed him, right, in a chokehold. And so it's been banned since then. And so we see the same thing happen again with Garner in 2014. And so it may look like banning things like that. It may look like having a civilian complaint review board that looks over, you know, some officers. It may look like getting rid of the bad apples in the thing. It may look like having community programs where the police are able to interact with community, you know, trying to patch up the years and the generations of violence with police, where abolition is just get rid of it completely, start over, you know? And so defund to me is a step toward abolition. It isn't abolition because it doesn't get rid of it completely, but it is a step. You know, with the defund campaign, our aim is to not only reduce their budget, but their size and power. Reduce what the NYPD got their grimy ass hands in, you know, so not responding to mental health crisis, not dealing with folks who are homeless in the street, you know, reducing all that, where in a world where they'd be abolished, other folk would actually be in position to do that. We'd have trained folks who can deal with situations. And it's not that the money ain't here. We got $6 billion just allocated somewhere else, right? So the money exists. With a campaign that knee deep in with the young people here in New York City is removing police from schools. And $450 million a year is spent to police and ultimately feed Black and brown young people to the mass incarceration, to the prison industrial complex, right? So we're looking at all these things connected and they profit off of that. You think about, I forgot who first put me on to like thinking beyond, right? Because abolition, I was like, that's what? I've never thought we could live without police. And then you gotta obviously think, and you're like, oh, it exists. It's possible. People like Angela Davis and Miriam Cobbler have been talking about it for decades, right? It can exist. But they were like, yo, check it. Like, think about a vending machine that's in a prison. Someone owns a vending machine that's in a prison. How much money you think they get every day from our people who go up there to visit their family? Just that one vending machine. And it just like blew my mind, right? And then I'm like learning that like folks who are incarcerated make Victoria's Secret panties and make license plates and all these things. Like in California, right? They were paying them cents or nothing to fight these fires. But they get out and they can't become firefighters because they have, let's say, a felony, right? So everything that's meant to keep Black and brown folk down, the police are going to be there behind to make sure they keep us, right? This crab in a barrel thing. Like, so everybody knows, who knows me is just like, I'm so anti-police. But, you know, it's really because I believe in a world without police. And I believe in a world where community can keep each other safe. And I practice that, you know? And so it requires us to stop putting out these fires that show up all the time and really take the time to dream a new world, to create a new world. Because I didn't have time to think about what that can look like because I'm so busy trying to reform something that ultimately I'm like, cannot exist. We just can't coexist because it's just, the history is too deep. I don't believe in reform. I agree, right, with you. We're in the middle, of a whole big thing, but.
It's been political, like the police has been political, and we are taught that, oh, you know, they're neutral protectors of public safety, you know, so how are we going to be safe? And one of the things that I've noticed now during the pandemic is when I have taken the train during particular hours, I don't notice the police there anymore at peak hours when kids were supposed to get out of school. High schools particularly. I just don't, they're not there. Not that I'm asking for them to be there, but the overwhelming presence of police officers on the subway after school to entrap young people has been just astonishing. And that's what started in 2019 with protests here in the city, was through the beating of a young man in Brooklyn on his way to school or on his way from school. Just a young man, regardless, didn't need to be stopped. So I'm thinking of how can we get over the idea that we need, well, to start off, the safety issues are always against, Black and brown people are always a threat coming into a neighborhood. We are the threat. We're seen as menacing. And it goes back to a lot of how we started off the conversation, this legacy of white supremacy and state sanctioned repression, in order to clear the land, get rid of the people, and work people to death on that land. I mean, in a synopsis, right? But still ingrained in us is like we have to call the police to take care of a mental health issue or to take care of a domestic violence issue. They have been put into these positions where often case, and Adilka, you might know the stats better, but in many situations, they aggravate the violence or someone ends up being killed. So not to make a short question long, how can we start envisioning this? I mean, they've attempted it in Minnesota, community control, but there've been like wrenches being thrown in. Seattle had this block where the precinct was closed off. And then through infiltration, which, the police, it's just not surveillance. It's just not broken windows. It's just not, stopping kids getting on the subway or stopping people in their cars. It's also infiltrating movements in order to dismantle. But these are glimmers of hopes is what I want to bring up. These are examples that showed up last summer, but how can we carry this conversation with our neighbors who might be older, who might be like, well, I don't understand. How are we going to, be safe?
I think that's an incredibly important question. And I by no means I have all the answers. I can only talk from experience, but for me, okay, so in organizing, a lot of the work you have to do is unpack and unlearn so much that you've been taught from a colonized lens, from a lens of oppression, a lens of anti-Blackness, racism, all these isms and all these lenses, right? One of those things for me was unpacking the what I was taught growing up, which was that police keep me safe, right? So some of that an activity that I do with some of the young people. I work with youth 14 to 25, and I'm always super inspired by them. We had an activity where we went on in a circle, and it's like, okay, what do you think of when you hear the word safety? Where do you feel safe? Who keeps you safe? Everyone went around the room, their parents, the block that they live in, the parks that they play sports in, their guidance counselor, if they knew who they were, right? All these things. Not one person named the police officer, or any kind of law enforcement. And so for me, the first step was understanding that safety didn't equal police. What did safety equal to me? Where do I feel safe the most? And that's in community, whether it's people that are related to me or not. I've been organizing for almost 20 years and I've grown up with a community, with a movement family, it's like chosen family. And that's who I feel safe with. And so you start to kind of like break down safety and what it would mean, and you get community together, And so one thing I will say, abolition can't happen overnight. That's not going to work. That's disaster. Some people are like, you're just going to remove police and the world's going to go to shit. Like, well, if we just remove them overnight, yes. The point is, let's start with the budget. You start breaking down that budget. You start reducing that budget. You start funding things, right? We know violence and crime is usually the root is because people's needs aren't met. People don't have jobs with livable wages. People don't have homes. People don't got good food to eat, right? Good schools that are funded and that are not patrolled by police. and there's statistics that prove it, right? Because let's think about the wealthy and the people who got money who don't got cops on their corners, right? We know statistically areas that are well funded and where people's needs are met, the need for police isn't there. I can tell you, I can go somewhere right now, or where I live actually, it's predominantly white folk. I can go weeks without seeing a police car, police officers. Whereas when I lived in Bushwick, which is a predominantly Latinx neighborhood in Brooklyn, every other corner there's a rookie cop because gentrification, right, is now calling for these police officers to protect the wealthier folk moving in, you know? So not only is everything connected and we pay attention to those kind of things, but we know you start breaking down that $6 billion budget and start funding jobs and summer youth programs and all these things, the crime's gonna drop because folks got what they need, right? The violence, if that's what the focus is, I'm using that as an example, you know, and then you gotta hustle for it. For us, it's like beginning to slowly break down this budget, beginning to slowly reduce the size and scope and power of the NYPD. Hopefully, you know, or in the last year, folks, I invite y'all to look. There have been many, many places in the country that have end contracts with police and schools. It is beautiful. And we're hoping to follow that up here, but we have a bit of a bigger fight, you know, but I do think it starts with unpacking that and starts with having conversation and allowing yourself. I think Angela Davis says it like, you gotta allow yourself to radically dream every time. And so in moments where I'm like, you know, if God forbid something bad happens, I know I'm not gonna call the police. I'm not. I got people I'm gonna call for my own healing and safety. And so I think it starts with believing that people can come together and have each other's backs, and also remembering that police didn't always exist, and remember the reason why they were created. You know, that's what keeps me pushing when I think of a new world that can exist one day.
No, absolutely, absolutely. John?
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, I just think it's a layer cake. And for me, it always like starts with education and like just teaching folks like there is another way, and that obviously this is way that we've been programmed to believe is not the only way that things can work. And I also, for some reason, end up thinking of like $5 million. That number just keeps popping into my head, and maybe I have something with the number 5, but I'm just like, you know, there are a lot of organizations that could probably use, you know, a portion of $5 million, right? And that could probably heal and, you know, help a lot of public programs. That may sound like a lot of money to us because, you know, we ain't got no money, but that's like a fraction of a $6 billion budget. Like, how can they not, you know, defunding the police makes their job easier. Like by, you know, having people who are, you know, trained professionals in mental health and, you know, social services and whatever it is, like that essentially makes your policing easier. But no, that's, they can't hear that. They can't even think about that. But those are things that I guess I'm always thinking about and coming back to.
Yeah. Both of you reminded me of one of my favorite memes this summer. Was one where the image was split. It was a cop on the top, and there was a black man at the bottom with glasses and like a vest with like a classroom setting behind him. And the meme up top said, you know, some are complaining about, you know, we can't do our job without the budget. And then right at the bottom, it says, you know, ask a teacher how they are doing their job without a budget.
Exactly.
But we also have to dismantle the prison system because people are still making money, right? It take one person will make whoever owns this prison $1 million over the course of 20 years. That's one person. And it's just not one jail that these entities have. And it's just not one person in this prison. So they're so intertwined in order to place this money, the money that is abound. I think there were $160 billion being allotted to creating this massive super missile that will require $264 million to maintain. And this is the Pentagon, but nonetheless, a lot of our law enforcement comes from from military and maintained through military. So if that same amount of money, rather than building missiles, is actually put into our social fabric, into social programming, into making sure that everyone has a meal on their table and they don't have to worry about their meal the next day or the next year or the next couple of months, neither do their families ever. Have healthcare, have housing as a human right, dirt cheap. It should be free if we're talking about these types of budgets. But the lack of wanting to, it goes back into those very few people who have profited from our society from the inception of Europeans coming to this side of the world in 1492. It's the production, the means of production.
Yeah, the crimes of capitalism rearing its ugly head again.
I know, like they have to get a new plot line. But I take that back because no. I think we might be ready for Q&A or for questions from our audience. Or comments.
Yeah, there were, not seeing any questions in the chat, but I don't know, it looks like Perla had a few comments. I don't know if Perla, you wanted to ask those if you're still here.
Albert sent me a question that I can answer really quickly. The question was, were the individuals in each photo related? Mother of her dead son and siblings in the photo. Yes, all the images are of mothers and their children. No one in the project is an actor, for obvious reasons. They, the way, a mother holding their son is going to hold the son in a very specific way. I'm making the images with a large format camera, so I'm making the images, one image at a time. So it takes a while to construct the image. It's not like I'm shooting digitally where I can shoot like 60 photos in like half a second. So I spend, half hour, hour and a half with the families, and I make it just, like I said, one image at a time. We typically only make about between 2 and 4 images. But yeah, everyone in the photos are related. So whether it be mother, son, and extended family, siblings, everyone is family in this.
John, in regards to your photograph, what is the significance of the locations, and are the locations connected to the families in the photo?
Yeah, all the images are environmental, so they are where the families either live or work, pretty much very close to. So they have a connection with pretty much every image. They have a connection with where the image is made. I think there are very few images where the families do not live where we made the image. But yeah, everyone else this is where they live, where they work, because it was important to, in the first year that I'm making the work, 2014 to 2015, I was just working here in New York City and New York State. But obviously this issue is far bigger than New York. So it was important to go to, Omaha, to California, Alabama, New Orleans, etc., and use that as a backdrop. Again, because these actions have happened all over the country. So that's where the significance comes from.
Thank you.
Hi, Perla, I see you there. Go ahead.
Hi, guys. I love your work, and I was thinking of the Four Freedoms. I know Hank Williams briefly from having photographed the lynching memorial where he has this beautiful sculpture. And I thought how beautiful it would have been to have those, they do these huge billboards across the country, to have had your photographs and to have had Adilka's statement about where are the Amber Alerts for our people. I mean, I just could see that everywhere. It would be really, really beautiful.
You have to write to Hank, Perla.
I will. But my other thought was, I had sadly a cousin who was a real I'll leave it at that, who became a cop. And I always felt that cops should, I know there's that concern that how do you have policemen be from your own community? Because then there's the possibility of corruption, because why would you turn in your own, let's say your own cousin, if he's dealing smoke or whatever he's doing? And honestly, I'd rather deal with that than having people come from outside. I grew up, I'm an elderly person. I grew up in Harlem, where I look back and I go like, oh my God, I was in a little Catholic school up at 142nd Street, and I had Chinese, Ecuadorian, Irish. I mean, I couldn't believe how it was really the melting pot of New York City in Harlem, in West Harlem. And it was not until I got older where if I spoke Spanish, I was gifted with being able to speak several languages, not so much because I studied it, but I had a good ear. And if I spoke Spanish, it was always stop speaking Spanish. But if I spoke French, Italian, or Portuguese, I was an intelligent person. And I couldn't understand how did I go from a neighborhood where we all were appreciating, and we could make fun of each other's culture, but because kids always make fun of each other no matter what, but we did enjoy that we were so different, you know, that we had kids from everywhere. And oh my God, did you know that he's from wherever, or she's from, you know? And if someone got ridiculously stupid about whether it was gender or race, then you go like, hey, you know, chill, we're all different, you know. But I was privileged to grow up with so many different children in Harlem at the time. Obviously neighborhoods got more and more segregated as time went on, but I always felt that bringing a policeman from the suburbs into the city, especially after the 70s, my work, I'm a photographer, my work captured the burning down of the Bronx and the people that stayed afterwards. And there's no way that if all the reporting on television, the reporting everywhere is about how horrible those people are that they burn in their own places. None of it was about the biggest drug dealers in the Bronx were the cops, and many other things that they could have really, if they had done in-depth reporting. So I cannot stand the thought of having cops come from outside. To me, that's like a, what's that term when you're, you know, going in and being the oppressive group? It's like, unless we find a way to not have police come from outside, I don't think we're going to change a great deal. We're really not. We have to find a way to say you have to be at least within some, you know, some parameter of the neighborhood or the same type of neighborhood. You know, city cops for city and suburban cops for suburbia. That's my 3 cents.
Mhm.
But yes, I will talk to Hank, because this would be wonderful if they're going to continue those billboards. I think your photographs and your statement on, you know, Amber Alert, or if you wish to, you know, do something else, but it should be very short, would be very powerful across the country. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question in the chat from Chris. Can you talk about the role of art in general and photography in particular in getting people to recognize each other's humanity?
I think so. Let's talk about the role of art in general. I mean, art and I mean, not just photography, but, you know, poetry, writing, obviously it has the ability to open people's eyes to see something that they may have heard or may see on the television or may see in the news, but approach it from a different angle that they hadn't considered. Speaking about Stranger Fruit, that's, I guess, kind of where the crux of its strength is, where, you know, we've heard of, you know, these highly publicized murders, but when you strip it all away and, you know, have people thinking about, oh, Black Lives Matter, BLM, that's the first thing they think of, and then they're like, oh, BLM is whatever. But if you strip it away and you think of it from, you know, the standpoint of a mother losing their child, And, you know, what did they lose their child for? They lost their child for absolutely nothing. And what are the reasons behind that? You know, hatred, racism. It just opens up another context that people can approach the work and approach the topic from. So I think that's one of the beauties of art. And art has always had the ability to influence and, you know, leave a lasting impression. We were just talking with my students yesterday about, you know, the role of images. And I think one of my students was talking about Vietnam War and how, you know, Nick Ute's image of, you know, Napalm Girl, how that shaped, you know, how people responded to the Vietnam War. And it's like, oh my God, this is what's going on over there. Completely changed, you know, the outlook. So I guess that's what I'm, you know, thinking about, and that's what I'm looking at with the work. And obviously with Stranger Fruit, there's so many different layers. Talking about, you know, just the mothers and sons, you know, when you strip away race, you're talking about a mother and a child. But then, you know, having the religious aspects, you know, for, you know, folks who are Christian, Catholic, whatever denomination, it doesn't matter. But knowing the importance of that motif, Mary holding the dead body of Christ, and how that can then be another connecting point through the artwork that can open people's eyes to what is going on. So it's layered. It's a layered cake, pretty much for everything. But there are these different avenues that people can understand the complexities that we're talking about.
Yeah, it's not like they're actually devoting time on the evening news or on news programs to talk to families in depth, not just, you know, a quick coverage because it happens to be a particular month of the year, but just, you know, really in-depth look and analysis and conversation, constant conversation with the trauma that's occurring and has been occurring. I think that art, when an artist chooses to devote time to this, because not all artists do, I think that it brings that much needed spotlight, and it is a residue of human culture. Like, we have these two choices that are residues of human culture. One being this violence, and you know, another is amongst many others. But another is this a healing process, unfortunately, due to this traumatic experience, right?
There's a question from Mary that's somewhat related. Mary writes, while this issue with the police has been happening straight along, I find it interesting that video and cameras being on our phones have been really the things that have forced the issue into the light more and more for the population at large. Photography has always forced us to look a problem in the face, from Emmett Till through Vietnam to now. How has the amplification of these images now impacted photography as a medium for activism now?
I guess I'll dive in if nobody wants to. How has the amplification of these images now impacted photography? I'm not sure. It sure does make it stressful. I guess how I would answer that is thinking of the evidence and the importance of having the evidence, but also the burden of pain with having such evidence. Yes, because on one hand, you need the evidence to maybe feel something. What would we do last year if we didn't have the video of George Floyd? That ridiculous 9-minute video, or however long the video was. I know the encounter was like 9 minutes. You know, I think I keep coming back to the cost is just too high. If it takes people to have that, if it takes people to see the video to care, if it takes people to see the video to understand what's going on, and it takes another person to die, then the cost is too high. You know what I'm saying? Like, we've been talking about this issue. You know, Stranger Fruit began in 2014. I'm not the only person talking about it. You know, Sean Bell was 2006. Amadou Diallo was like 2 years prior to that. Rodney King was in, you know, so we've been talking about this. So for one hand, yeah, it's good that, you have, dash cams, you have this footage, you're seeing what's going on, having that evidence. But at the same time, think of the other side of the equation. Think of the communities that are seeing this over and over and over again, and how that's infecting their mental health over and over and over again, to be, just experiencing this trauma, reliving this trauma almost on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, on a yearly basis. It is overwhelming. So I don't know. How's the amplification of these images now impacted photography? It's difficult, and it's complicated.
It's an interesting line that you're bringing up, and John, in regards to the question. There are a couple of things, like, well, photography on its own, it's social media, right? If we had cameras on our phone but no social media to post them anywhere, would there have been would there have been a reaction? You still have the time to print the phone, where to put it, so it's in tandem to Mary's question. It's just not photography on your phone, but it's also the vehicle that is driving social media. They both go in hand in hand. And then, John, something that you just said is that in line to these images being broadcast worldwide within seconds, there's something that you mentioned, that communities have been going through this time and time again in a very private way. And not that because it's private, it's any better, but this private drama of experiencing day in, day out. And this, I'm from the generation that I remember Rodney King. I remember that happening. I remember the protest clearly that took place. And they happened on television. And so, and it was because this one guy had a camcorder and gave it to a news station, but there was a lapse of time, there was like a day. But before that, there were other killings. There were other situations that we don't know of. I don't know if this is forming a question, but there's just something that that resonated with me when you said that there's this private experience that communities have been going through, but now it's become I don't want to say a spectacle, because to the question, how would we have known otherwise? But there's a spectacle aspect. It's this, we're teetering through this line where is this becoming like violent porn?
Trauma porn.
Trauma porn, right? And I think maybe we have to reassess the function more of social media, particularly because it's different than just photography, in my opinion. I don't know if Oscar has any sense to put into this.
I do. I've actually been thinking about this as you guys are talking. I think that one of the, I guess, main implications of photography is that we interpret it as truth. Whether we know it's a manipulation or not, there's something about seeing a physical rendering of reality that we have to almost inherently believe that it's real. And for me, as someone who walks through life with a fair bit of privilege, understanding how photography has been used as a weapon against people just as much as it's been used as a weapon to amplify voices. Photography started out as a rich man's club. You couldn't do it if you didn't have enough money, and a lot of that still rings true. I think that with the development of portable cell phones and digital cameras and things that make photography more accessible, it's only natural that it's been used in a way that works in tandem with activism. We're seeing people, we're being forced to interpret realities that might have not been on our radar before. And I think that I don't want to say a reclamation of photography because that's not a real thing just yet. But if you're comparing photos taken by average people on the street with their phones to early National Geographic photos where people were flown in and objectifying people of color in other places, then you've got to deal with how that has changed. And I think a lot of that is through the spread and reach of photography.
I think we have one more question from RJ. And it's for everyone. How are y'all striking a balance between indignation and momentary internal calm or peace?
Adilka?
I'm like, shit.
Mhm.
I mean, that's a tricky question, especially now during this pandemic and this lived reality that's here. You know, I was also thinking about while listening to y'all in New York City, how difficult the police make it to record them, and how antagonizing they are. And for a long time, we had to do an educational campaign, letting the community know that you have the right to film police activity as long as you're not intervening, meaning don't be like all up in their face or whatever. And I can't tell you the amount of times I've gone, it's called cop watching. I started off by the Black Panther parties in the beginning. They cop watched with shotguns and law books. We cop watch with our cell phones. Very different life right now. But basically it's going around recording police interactions with communities. And it, for the most part, tends to de-escalate, because then the police are like, oh, I'm on camera now, right? I'm not gonna be the next Daniel Pantaleo, which has all these implications to it on its own. But they will antagonize you, right? Like I've had police officers like blow kisses at me and be gross, or like shine their flashlights so I can't like see their or hide their badges, like their badge number. But it's so important because once they see you really do have that power with a camera to capture. But more importantly, like I've cop watched with my phone being off and dead, and they didn't know it. And I'm outside like, I see you, my phone is dead. They don't know that, but they do know that now there's eyes on them. And so they're gonna ease up on the homie they were roughing up on the train station, right? So that's a super, super powerful tool. But I say that to say that when these moments come of peace and calmness, I tend to hold on with them for as long as they're here. Therapy helps. I'm in therapy, it helps. No, but you know, leaning and loving on community is what's kept me sane and grounded in this work for as long as I've been doing this work. You know, organizing is exhausting. You give all of yourself to people and community and really just trying to change things for the better. But it's the most fulfilling work I've ever done. I can't think about waking up and doing anything different. So I'm huge on joy and laughter and love, because we have so much of the bad shit everywhere else that if we don't lean into the good, even the small moments, like it's like we're not gonna make it till the ending, and we gotta. So leaning on community, laughing. I have the most obnoxiously loud laugh, my Dominican ass, you know, but just leaning into that and into these small moments of like love and calmness, because yeah, things are wild. If that maybe answers your question.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how balance. I don't know. It's difficult because it's, you know, it's obviously it's overwhelming, and for us who are in the community, you know, we're living it. You know, we're not just experiencing it from the outside, we're living it. So it's hard to detach from that, from obviously for many reasons. So I don't know. Momentary calm. Yeah, laughter is good. When one can, you know, try to keep it light. Try to, you know, just talk shit. Ice cream also really helps. Gonna have some in a little bit. Got some apple pie right next door. Gonna do that. But yeah, it's difficult because it obviously we're living it, and you know, every time something else happens, you're just, you know, and I come to Adilka's poem thinking of sanctuary and thinking of home, where I'm just like, man, this is stupid. This country's stupid. Where the hell can I go on this planet where I can not have to deal with this dumb shit? So I'm currently looking at Saturn. They haven't made any out there yet, but you know, I think it's far enough where I can get some light and not have to deal with folks here, but we'll see if that ever happens.
There we go. How is everyone feeling? Does anyone else? Seems like a good note to end on in some ways, unless there are any other questions.
It's like, hello, friend. We see a new face pop up. I'm like, hi.
I was just going to pop up to say thank you so much for sharing this with us and doing it with us. It's really been good.
Yes, thank you to all of you for your contributions and enlightening all of us.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm really glad we could have this happen. So.
Yes, indeed. All right.
Well,
oh man, it's dark outside. Ugh, all right.
Yes,
yeah, you
it
got to
is.
try to.
It's late out there, I know.
You got to enjoy that 70 degrees a little bit.
Yeah, I was gonna take the ice cream to the roof, but I guess the
You
the
still could
living
do
room.
that. You could probably just throw a hoodie on. I promise. It's still nice.
Oh,
Got the
that's-
window
that's-
open. It's nice.
That's right. I just got like 2 new hoodies yesterday. I can do that.
Go. There you go.
All right. I can do that. Nah, my lazy ass. I'm probably just gonna like lay on the couch and then call it an afternoon. And we'll see y'all.
And thank you to everyone who joined us this evening too. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if you didn't catch all of it, we will have it on our YouTube channel and probably next week. So
yeah, look for it.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank
have a great
you.
weekend. Thank you all.
Everyone. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining us.
Bye.